Today I'm going to show you how I go about drawing a portrait with Polychromos colour pencils. I'll talk you through the whole process, including all the tips and tricks that I use. Hey, my name's Gemma and I want to help you improve your drawing skills. If it's your first time here, don't forget to click the subscribe and the notify bell so you never miss an art tutorial. Now, the first place I like to start with any portrait is with the eyes, and then I work my way out from there. You can see as I start drawing the eyes, I always start with the very lightest colours and gradually work my way down to the darkest. I'm drawing brown eyes here, so I'm going to start by putting down a layer of a cream colour. I'm using the ivory for this, and from there I'm going to build layers on top. As I build up the other layers, I'm looking very closely at my reference photo to see what colours are actually in the iris. It's not solely made up of browns like you think it would be. Firstly, I can see the reflection of the eye. There's a little bit of light blue, so I'm going to get that in there quite early because it's quite a light colour. I can also see some kind of orangey flecks in there as well, so I'm going to use a little bit of the burnt ochre to get that in early as well. And then once I've got all of the lighter colours in, I can start to build up the browns on top. Now I'm working in the same way with the browns as I have been throughout. I'm going to start with the lighter browns and work my way to the very darkest browns. So I'm beginning with the bistre colour and then moving on to the walnut brown and then the dark sepia. And I'm really taking my time drawing the eyes. Obviously it is all important, but the eyes are the most important part if you want it to look realistic. Another quick tip for you is to always make sure you have a really sharp pencil. It's very hard with a blunt pencil to control both the amount of pressure you're using as well as exactly where the pencil's going if it's a blunt pencil. Now I'm happy with the iris, I'm going to move on to drawing the whites of the eyes. And it's important to remember that the whites of the eyes are not white. They're actually quite dark, particularly around the edge. Because the eye is a sphere and is therefore curved, around the edges it gets really quite dark. And when you take into account any shadows as well, I generally use some quite dark greys for the whites of the eyes. So I'm just going to work through a few different greys to get the whites of the eyes in. On this picture they're quite small, so it didn't take me very long, and then I am able to move on to doing some of the skin tone around the eyes. Now I've got the whites pretty much how I want them, I'm going to move back towards the iris and make some of the darker values a bit darker. Once I'm happy with the darkest bits on here, I work back down to the lightest, back through the colours that I've already used until all the colours are nicely layered up. And that is the general rule that I use throughout the portrait, is to start at the lightest, work to the darkest, and then back down to the light. I find it a really nice, organised way to work layering up. Now before I get on to drawing any of the skin, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about choosing colours. The last thing you want to do is draw a whole portrait and realise you picked the wrong skin tones. So for all of my pencils, I draw out little swatches so that I can see what the colour pencil looks like on the paper. When selecting the skin tones, I look at that swatch chart and compare it to the reference photo. And from there, I pick out the colours that I think will be the most appropriate. Even then, to make sure that I definitely have the right colours before I put anything down on the paper, I like to draw out another swatch with a combination of the colours I've chosen. So you can see here I've just drawn a circle and I'm just going to shade it in. I'm going to do the lightest values up in the top left, the darkest in the bottom right, and see how they all blend together and if I think that that is a correct match for my reference photo. So I'll show you the colours that I picked for my swatch here, and it will make it easier to see what I'm doing when I'm drawing the actual portrait. So I always make sure I put down a very light base layer, and for this I've chosen the ivory. Generally I quite like this as a base for skin tones because it's light but it's got kind of a yellowy undertone which works well with skin. So I'm going to pop that all over, and then I'm going to add in some of the light flesh colour very, very lightly over the top. I want to have a light patch in this top left corner, so I'm going to put some light grey on there. I can see quite a bit of light grey in the lighter, brighter areas of the skin. And I'm also going to add in a layer of cinnamon. Cinnamon I find always works very well for skin tones. It's kind of a pink, but an earthy browny kind of pink, and I frequently pick it for skin tones. I'm going to add a tiny bit of burnt ochre before getting down towards the right hand side where it's getting a bit darker. And for this I'm going to start with using the bistre. And then the very darkest colour I plan on using for the skin tone is the walnut brown. And now I've done that, I'm going to work back up through the colours, going back over what I've already done, just pressing a little bit harder this time. Now, just because I've picked these colours for the skin tone doesn't mean that I'm going to limit myself and say I can't use anything except for these colours. If I can see it in the reference photo on a particular part, then I will still draw what I see. But now I've drawn out this swatch, I can see that I am happy with these colours and I'm going to carry on with the portrait. So with that in mind, I'm going to start drawing some of the skin around the eyes. You can see I'm using the exact same colours as I did in the swatch, but I'm making sure that I look closely at my reference photo so I get the shadows in the right place. And now I've got some light skin tone around the eyes, I'm going to start adding in the lash line. Now you'll notice here that I'm purposely only drawing the lash line. I'm not drawing any eyelashes on top of the skin, and you'll see why that is a little bit later on. Now I've got some definition around the eyes, I'm going to continue building up on the skin tone. And I am using some colours here that I didn't use in the swatch. Around the bottom of the eye, I'm using some purple kind of colours. Because the skin under the eye is so thin, it makes it a bit more see-through so you can see veins through and gives it a kind of bluish tone. So I'm popping a little bit of purple under there to give that blue tone. And I'm also using some greys for the shadows either side of the nose. So I'm just gradually building up my layers to build up the colour of the skin. The last thing I'm going to say on the eye area for now is to do with the eyebrow area. So you'll notice that I'm not putting any eyebrow hairs on there yet, which same with the eyelashes, you'll see why a little bit later. What I am doing is marking out where the eyebrows will be. So it's a bit darker underneath the eyebrows and I'm making sure to shade a little bit darker in the area where they will eventually be. And I'm sticking to more of the brown tones in this area, but I'm still going very lightly. So the order I like to do a portrait in is I work feature by feature. So I start with the eyes and then move on to the nose and then the mouth and then the rest of the skin. So now I'm happy with the eyes, I'm going to move on to drawing the nose. And now I've covered how I go about drawing the skin tone, the nose is far less complicated than the eyes. The main thing that I do is pay close attention to the highlights and the shadows. The light in the reference photo I'm drawing is coming from the right hand side, so most of the shadow on the nose is over to the left. And particularly the bottom left side of the nose is quite dark. Beyond that, I'm noticing any colours that are particularly different from the skin tones I've selected. For example, around the nostrils, it's quite a bit redder than the rest of the nose and skin tone on the rest of the face. You can see while I'm drawing the nose here how well it works starting from the light colours and working up to the darkest. It means if there's any mistakes that are made, they're easier to correct because it gets covered up when it comes to the darker colours. And as far as drawing things like the nostrils go, they are quite dark, and by starting light and working up to dark, I think it's less intimidating drawing the darker patches like the nostrils. So now I'm happy with the nose, I can carry on moving down and work on the top lip and the mouth next. Now as I'm drawing the top lip, there are areas on here that do get quite dark. Because this is a portrait of a smiling child, I don't know what they're called. Are they smile lines? I'm going to call them smile lines. They are pushing the top lip further back, which is making a deeper shadow. As a general rule, if you make something darker, it pushes it back on a picture, and if you make it lighter, it brings it forward. So by making the edge of these smile lines darker, it is making the cheeks appear further forward. So now that's done, I can move on to the mouth. And the main thing to mention about the mouth is the teeth. So similar to the whites of the eyes, teeth aren't really bright white. Again, because they curve round and the places where they meet, it gets quite a bit of shadow in there. So on the most part, they're more like grey. There is the odd area that is quite bright if there is light reflecting off the teeth, but on the most part, I focus on greys. And beyond that, it's just about building up the pinks and reds, again using the layering as I've done throughout, to build up the colour of the lips. And similar to the area above, because the corners of the lips are pushed further back, they are more in shadow, so I'm making sure to add in some darker colours there. Alright, now I've got all of the features done, I can move on to doing the rest of the skin. I like to work section by section around the face to do this, as you can see. I've used quite a lot of grey on the left hand side in the shadowed area, but the rest of the skin is pretty light and didn't need building up as much with darker colours. Quick tip here, a good way to get as smooth a skin as possible is to use the side of the pencil rather than the tip and to work in little circular motions. It just makes it all go on much smoother, and it's easier to control the pressure of the pencil. That said, it's not looking as smooth as I would like it to. So I'm going to blend it now with a product called Zest It. To do this, I just use a Q-tip and starting in the light areas, use little circular motions and gradually work my way to the darkest. And when it's wet, it looks a bit peculiar, but when it dries, it does dry very nice and smooth. I am also able to draw over the top of Zest It, which I will be doing in a second, but you do need to make sure it is completely dry before you do that. Because I've chosen to blend it out with Zest It, this is why earlier I didn't draw in any of the eyebrow hairs or any of the eyelashes on top of the skin. If I did that, it would just end up a big smudgy mess, and I don't want that. So now that's completely dried, I can go back over the top of it, increasing the vibrancy of any areas I think need it. So I'm going to add a little bit more pink to a few places, like on the forehead, and towards the left the shadows aren't quite as dark as I want them to, so I'm just going to increase the shadow there as well. And now that that's done, I can start adding in the eyebrow hairs and eyelashes. I'm just going to speed through drawing the neck. It is exactly the same process as I used for the rest of the face. And then I'm going to start focusing on drawing the ear. The ear is also very similar to everything I've been drawing so far. I'm using quite a bit more pink in the ear though. Generally ears are quite pink, and I can certainly see in my reference photo it is pinker than a lot of the rest of the face. Last thing I'm going to do on the skin is I'm going to use a little bit more Zest It on any areas that I think need it, and then I can move on to drawing the hair and the t-shirt. To select the colours I needed to draw the hair, I used the same swatches that I showed you earlier. I picked 6 colours which I could see in the reference photo. I've got some ivory as a base, and then a mixture of browns as well as some greys. And what I do is I use a very sharp pencil and work colour by colour from the lightest to the darkest again, working in flicking motions that go in the direction of the hair that I can see on my reference photo. And bit by bit, this builds up the texture and colour of the hair. As I'm drawing hair, I focus on drawing clumps of hair rather than individual hairs, because that's what you see when you look at a head of hair. If you want to know more about drawing hair, I have done a few videos on how to draw hair, and I'll pop links in the description. The very last thing to do is to draw the white t-shirt. And to draw this, I'm just using a combination of greys to build up the shadows and highlights. I personally don't like going into loads of detail when I'm drawing clothes because I feel like it detracts from the face. But I do want it to look like a t-shirt, so I'm just drawing in the key bits of shading. And that's it finished. I've covered quite a lot in the video today, so if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask in the comments below. And do give it a like if you found it helpful. Happy drawing, guys. I'll see you in the next one.